Well, hello everyone. You hear show you that the 9/11, they say Tears of the Heart, the killing activity right here, is basically that if most of us, of course, can remember, you say, 9/11 it is, for September 11th it is, and knowing about that, from I still have, of course, the papers and stuff like that. I still have the magazines, and then for most of it was is magazines, but I can still remember them that announcing on the news, of course, about from whenever from whatever the plane. It's like I think if I can remember, I think 747 or something like that. Flight 747. Bound from I guess if it's from Baltimore, if it was from Baltimore to to Los Angeles, California, or something like that. But anyway, that you have right here is that the example right here I went and drew of the Twin Towers. It is, and I can remember that of course being in school it is, and anybody probably thinking about that is to do an activity to where that more likely that for any emergency exit routes, it is it knowing about that with most emergency exits at especially inside the World Trade Center that they probably have like you say if I remember right that they announced that they would have at least once a year to where that they would announce to show all the employees that were working inside the building it was to where where emergency exit was, and to in case that they had to do like which cause emergency evacuation is in case of a fire or something like that, electrical storm, whichever it was. But basically that from the whole study, of course, about September 11th, it is knowing about that I can remember that which with the World Trade Center back whenever I was young, I can probably tell anybody here that it's not like I if I ever been to the had never been to New York City before, and of course they had not been into the building before. And with some people that they probably think about that they've seen them, they've seen the towers a couple of times, but just never been into them. It was, and but with me though, that I can tell anybody here that I had never heard of them, I never seen them before, and just knowing about whenever I heard on the news that they were being attacked, and then a lot of time, I was just thinking about that like with anybody that would be in school it was is but like well what are you talking about a plane that that struck the Pentagon, and then there was a plane that had flew right into the the North Tower. I think it was the North Tower that got hit first or something like that. It may have been the South Tower, but apparently that with these the Twin Towers though that you have the details I went ahead and drew right here for the Twin Towers. And I know of us, I get that the North Tower and of course the South Tower it is. And basically though that whenever I was in school though that remember hearing the principal on the air intercom announcing about the situation it was. And of course it was on a half day of school. I can remember a lot of times with if it's elementary school or if it's high school or if it's middle school, it is grade school, or if it's junior high, whichever, that knowing about that homeschooling it is that more likely that you're going to have that they would announce it on the news a lot of times about knowing about that the tower is being attacked. It's like our country is under attack. It is, and I can just think about is that knowing about that whenever I was in school though that I can remember that they were talking about it, and then they would let the students go into the library just to check the latest news. And I can remember seeing of course is that whenever the principal was talking about it, and then seeing the buildings, they say that one of the buildings that was of course that was on fire, it was on the top it was, and they would let us they would show it for about, say 20 minutes inside the library, and then whenever we had to go to our next class, it was that I can remember the last class I remember was going at was over at at the high school I was. It's like Francis Howell North High School, and knowing about that the last class I was going to was gym class. It was gym class was the very last class I was in, and knowing about is that I remember asking there, I'm like, if you heard on the news it was, and And I can remember right after I got off school that day, of course, I went to work, and then people were talking about it, at work about that. So it's like it's that situation to where you got the towers right here, and then of course you got right here is the Pentagon, and of course I'm like, yeah, I know the Pentagon looks something like this right here, where there's a few windows, let's say, on the front, and you see you got right here is the Pentagon, and about think 4 hijacked planes that struck, they say, that the Pentagon, and of course the field. I think the Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, I think field it was is like for where the number 4 plane hit, and I can say that with the planes though be drawing this right here. I'm trying to think about if this will be like which calls facing the north side or south side, but anyway that I'll go and draw a plane right here. And with most anybody talking about is like the tears of the heart, it is basically that if knowing about, we picture in our mind about knowing about that maybe if any of the passengers on board the plane if they had even had time to jump out of the plane with parachutes, just to escape, just to escape, this attack here. And in a lot of ways, I keep thinking about, something that you would maybe see on one of those movies. Is that knowing about, like, if most of us have seen the movie, Air Force One, whenever the passengers were able to jump out of the plane, is a guide, by the president. It's like, I think it's Harrison Ford who stars in that movie. But anyway, but you have is it to where passengers would be able to evacuate the plane, just by parachute. And anybody would probably think about back then, though, that with most passengers, that maybe that they don't want to had to, they don't know how to use a parachute or anything like that. But so far as life-saving tips about getting them off the plane, so that way they can go ahead and get the situation under control. It was, and it seems like it was all a matter of time of knowing about from whenever that the plane was hijacked, and then knowing about it's like so far as the amount of time it took, and we could probably think about is that any way of stopping them. And it's not like knowing about with technology nowadays, though, that you're probably thinking about that a lot of times. If there's anything that could have been done about, it's like what you call is like you say a hijacked aircraft. It was, and then that was headed towards, you say that the north is say tower, and then of course is the south tower, and then if it, the hijacked aircraft, if I can remember right, I'm trying to remember all these the names of the flights, the flight numbers. It is, I think it was flight 743 or something like that. Bound for Los Angeles, California. It is, and then there was another one, and that was bound, for I think two or three of them that were bound for Los Angeles, California. It was, but anyway, that. Yeah, it says it on in the papers too, but I'm like, I still have a lot of that stuff too. But anyway, but you have right here is these planes right here, and I could don't know, like me, like talking about the planes. I can do the best I can here, describe about the planes here. I don't really know what kind of planes, what numbers that they were, but from what I always read about, of course, is with the details of the planes. I can probably tell anybody here, just do the best I can to describe and about the planes here, about knowing about that whichever one that hit whatever building it was, and knowing about a lot of lives, of course, that were lost. It was that day, and I can tell anybody here that my speech teacher and I would a lot of times have conversations about if whenever the plane had struck, you say the north and south tower is knowing about how did they think that you think that they managed to escape, and let's just say if it would have been such a good idea for them to just jump out the window, and I was like told her, I'm like, no, well, why not? Because it was 100 feet, and like, well, it was more than 100 feet. It was about 100 and 110, stars. So that would have been about 112 feet, something like that, high in the air it was. And I can remember, her saying that, and it was like, that knowing about that. knowing about what it's like, just to actually exit the building. It was just by jumping out the window. And anybody who may be thinking about with jumping out the window, that especially if we're talking about a real high structure here, and knowing about that, if you're really thinking about the fact about anything to land on, or the fact about that there's something to grab a hold of to prevent maybe if you get a broken bone or something like that, how hard it would it would be. It's like, but anyway, anybody who may be thinking about it, maybe to draw the details about knowing about, if most of us know, of course, it's like we've seen on the news media nearly 13 years ago, that knowing about whenever the plane had struck the tower, it was, you got right here is a lot of the smoke and stuff like that. But then, of course, if I were to draw a person, it's like if I were to draw a person, with like jumping out of the window, it was, and then fall. And a lot of times it's like knowing about that, there's probably a lot of questions remain of knowing about is like a person. Why is it that there's a person jumping out the window? Why is there a suit? I don't know if, I think they said something about that there was a suit or something like that, a briefcase that was thrown out the window, and then there could have been I don't know if a table and chairs or anything like that, but whenever I was talking about with my speech teacher, it was that I can remember telling her that with most of these rooms in here, there would probably be offices. I don't think that they would have, with most of them inside those buildings would be office buildings. I didn't think that they used them for what you call is like maybe just this machinery. If these towers were being used for like what you call is like for like the oil products or anything like that, or anything related to like what you call is just satellite TV operation company or anything like that, where they just mainly had like computers or acceleration rooms or anything like that, but basically office buildings to where people would probably be there working, and all of a sudden the plane just comes right through and destroys say whatever debris that it hits. And like they said, that the plane had wound up hitting at an angle right here, but just knowing about that, the tears of the heart, it is knowing about that, the fact about that, that we, of course, we still talk about this, and I'm sure that anybody probably think about it, it's just something that more likely you're never going to forget either. Is like knowing about with me, I have not lost hardly anything that day. It's like on September 11th, nearly 13 years ago it was. Haven't lost anything, but on the other hand too, that knowing about it is like, of course, my grandfather died nearly 6 weeks after September 11th it was. But on the other hand too, that knowing about this day of September 11th it was, that we can think about besides what you call is like any type of terrorist media sites, such as assassination of President Kennedy, and of course a few other things too that happened from the past 50 years it was, and like say World War I and World War II, and a few of those wars. But on the other hand, that I could think about is that something to keep on history is knowing about with like with airport security. Of course, they got say advanced stuff, and anybody may be thinking about maybe that new advanced stuff maybe not be good enough. It is, but on the other hand too, that I remember they mentioned on the news about the fact about a lot of the airline employees that I don't know if I have anything to say about it, but on the other hand too, if I heard that they did not even bother really to check the IDs, check the IDs about knowing about if these travelers, if these people who had the boarding passes just to get on the plane, from exactly about if they had any valid IDs on them, if they if you had to check their luggages, and of course there's anything that was causing interference, it was is knowing about that that with the hijacking team, and anybody may be thinking about that the stuff that more likely you may not think about later on, but knowing about that it's like with most airports that they would have like which costs like for security it is, and knowing about, I would think that with most airports that they would at least check some type of ID, check some type of identification, and knowing about if you're going to have a boarding pass, it would show exactly about from where you're going, and then of course from where you come from, where you're going, and then I guess more likely it showed that. But on the other hand too, that knowing about is like checking the luggages and stuff like that. But on the other hand too, that knowing about that with like air travel, it's like with if it's air travel, or if it's like what you call like getting on board a ship, it is. And knowing about that half the time about about airport security, it is. And that knowing about a lot of times it's like what could have been done, of course, just to prevent some type of this act right here, just like I can still remember, of course, the details I can remember about the Oklahoma City bombing. It was if anybody remember about the fact about that any intruder that may have walked into the building, maybe with no ID it is, or something like that caused the bomb, to place a bomb inside the building, and then wind up inflating the building, it was. And the way I would think about it is that these types of situations, such as other things that you may have heard on the news about what you calls like I think the Fort Hood shooting, it is, and then of course the Columbine shooting. I can remember the Columbine shooting, it was, but basically talk about with terrorists though, and knowing about that with this stuff right here. And then I can remember that whenever I was in school was that I was working, I think I was in FACS class, if I can remember right, when I was in school at the time. And if I can remember right, that do I ever remember whenever I was in school writing the date for the last time before I heard the news, for September for September 11th of 2001. It would probably have been wrote as like what you call like '01 during that time. And if I can remember right, that would have been a little bit more kind of like what my handwriting looked like back then, maybe a little bit more scribbly, it is. But anyway, that you have you say talking about if I were to make a mistake, it's like if I were to say make a mistake, if I say like today or something like that, a lot of times I would just mark it off. I see that a lot of times in my schoolwork, if I were to make a mistake on my schoolwork. But if I can I may check around too, but if I can maybe look around, find out if I have any schoolwork, of course, directly from the September 11th, the day of September 11th, and I can maybe find out, all right, the day, from whenever you wrote the date, of course, on the schoolwork, it was, from whenever you heard the news about the towers in New York City being attacked, it was. And I can probably tell anybody that the first class I was in, I think, was English class, and we were talking, if I can remember right, we were talking about magnets. I think it was about magnets, or that usually that was in science class. But anyway, that we will be talking, I think it was about nouns, or something like that. You say verbs or nouns, or it's talking about today. Today is I think they say for Tuesday, and be talking about words, it is. If I can remember right, that I think English class was the first class I was in. I would say right around 8:30 a.m. About 7:30, 8:30 a.m. something like that would have been my first class. On that day of September 11th, and then looking up, you say hearing about on the news, and I could probably tell anybody here that on that day though, I thought maybe the pilots were drunk, and then of course my mom and dad, of course, my parents, it is, and of course other cousins or whoever, thought that maybe it was just a movie, it's just a commercial, it is, and I don't want anybody to say actually it's in real life, it is. But my opinion, of course, I thought maybe the pilots were messing around and maybe lost control of the plane and wind up crashing it into the building. And it was some people after the first plane hit, that they were like, oh, well, it was an accident. Because apparently that, if I remember right, that, like the Empire State Building, they wind up getting hit by a plane, from accident reasons it was. Which, if I can remember right, for like what you call American history, it was basically, back in like I say, I don't know if it was 1978 or something like that. But anyway, but talking about a plane that going into a building, in a lot of ways, I was like, a plane going into a building. I'm like, that's just, that, why would, and I remember somebody with, over there where I work was like, whenever they first seen that on TV, they were like, why would somebody be that dumb? And I was thinking of how that, telling my parents, it's like, why are these pilots doing this? Why are they crashing planes into the buildings? They're not supposed to be crashing into the buildings and killing other people or whatever. And I can remember that for whatever reason, my parents, it's like they knew what was going on, say, according to what they heard on the news about the hijacking of the planes. But according to what I would say is that knowing about with me, though, that I did not know that. Apparently, that from what they announced on the news, it looked like to me like they were trying to find out, what's going on here. That there's another plane that hit the building. It's crashed into, say, the South Tower. It is, and anybody may be thinking about what's going on here. And then after a while, and knowing about that, those planes were hijacked. Apparently, that there was some hijackers that got on the plane and then took control of the plane and then crashed into the building. And I could probably tell anybody here that knowing about what my opinion about knowing about what terrorists is, though, is anybody probably think about, why would you want to use a plane as a weapon, as a missile, and aim it at a big building? I just don't understand who would get the idea of that. But on the other hand, too, that I'm like, besides kids will be kids, basically talking about, it's like the story of knowing about, like, I got a new pair of glasses now, but let's just say the story about talking about, really, who would want to use, say, a pair of glasses, an old pair of glasses, and use it like what you call like for a laser point, and maybe use it like what you call like a spy goggle, if you would maybe want to do something, such as kidnap someone or maybe rape someone, and be like, especially with box cutters. Box cutters, of course, were created, of course, just to, just for, cutting open boxes and so, the normal need stuff. It's like talk about the license for normal need stuff, and like anybody probably thinking about that, like with anything that maybe you can get your hands on, that maybe that you can maybe use it as like what you call like some type of force, a threat, towards like what you call like for anything, such as, I'm gonna go ahead and go out there and hijack a bus, or I'm gonna go out and hijack a plane or whatever, but anyway, etc., etc. And the way I would think about it, anybody probably thinking about, is that with for between the Americans and of course the Islamis, or if it's like what you call Russians or anybody like that, and knowing about anybody who is not born here in America, and anybody who is who's not from here in America would probably think about is like knowing about, hey, it's so far tears of the heart, and knowing about, hey, that, well, why do you hate America so much? And then on the other hand, too, about the fact about, some people may think about is like it's all about, it's about, it's a rich country, and, some countries that don't have as much money, we're jobless or whatever. But on the other hand, too, that, they more likely say about, it's all about the fact about, about maybe the other beliefs, and knowing about that, this is more likely, if we kill people, then we'll be saved. It's like for known, whereas for our own God, But on the other hand, too, that I don't know if anybody really knows the exact reason to why it happened. It is, and not even the president more likely knows, and more likely it's possible that the president before that knowing about knowing about for any threat towards the country it is. And I even heard on the news, of course, about that they even received, that they even seen threats, on the news about talking about, it's like that they would have gotten a notice right around August the 29th, of August of September the 1st it was, that they were going to plan a team to hijack some aircrafts, it was, and then stir some media, stir some issues, of course, with the United States, and I guess that they more likely said that that, in order to be able to prove it's real, then they need to have a signature from the president, from like what you call the Islamic country or something like that, written in like, Aramaic or something like that, knowing that, proof it's a real threat it is. But on the other hand, too, that knowing about with me, though, is that the way I would think about it is that knowing about catching something, it's not too late. Anybody probably think about that, hey, you ought to give that student a real good grade if they can think about of a way of, it's like maybe steps, 1, 2, 3 of knowing about, the best ways, to keep safe. Of course, you say, especially on the airlines, because anybody can maybe think about, if you can maybe think of a, maybe a superhero. I even thought about this. It's like, talk about a superhero is knowing about if you're in any type of trouble, maybe such as Superman it is, any type of trouble, you say on the airlines it is. Anybody can maybe look at it as like what you call the imaginary friend, pal it is, or anything like that. But the type of superhero I'm talking about would be, something such as like what you call like something that has that ability to save people. And I don't know if there's anything such as what you call like air paramedic, air paramedic, where they if there was somebody that was injured on the plane, that they would have like a paramedic, aircraft flyer that would come up and pick up the passenger and take them off the plane and take them to the nearest clinic it was. And knowing about with me though that I keep thinking about that the type of superhero that more likely that is like be able to to do that would be is like talk about anybody maybe think about maybe a Superman type superhero it is. But on the other hand, and I'm like really that in order to be able to get superpowers, more likely is if like talking about is that the knowing about the steps, of course, that you would need to take in order to be able to it's like talk about the type of responsibility, knowing about that anybody probably thinking about anything related to maybe the movie RoboCop. It's like you talk about the crime fighting scene it is. But the way I would think about it is that what maybe we would maybe see on one of those movies compared to what we would see on one of those movies to what we would see in real life it is. And the way I would think about it is that is knowing about the type of grade maybe to get myself would be is like knowing about the type of actions that you would more likely need to take is that if you see something that looks vicious it is such as somebody talking about something it is, because I remember my teacher told me this back in I think it was back in 1999. If you heard about anything about somebody wanting to hurt somebody, somebody had learned how to make a bomb on the internet, or somebody knew how to make a homemade homemade chisel or something, any type of homemade chisel or something like that you might as well mention that to the teacher, because then the next day somebody was killed and then they're wondering about who's responsible it is. And I kept thinking though that back whenever I was going to school though that a lot of times it seems like a lot of the teachers were like what you call like I can't do anything about it since I didn't see it or something like that. And if there was any type of issues that were going on in the school, because I know with me I was bullied around a lot of times whenever I was in school, especially out on the playground, and knowing about a lot of times that people the teachers were wondering how come you don't tell anybody about those kids picking on you and teasing you and stuff. And a lot of ways I tell them that I just learned that to try to deal with it, or the fact about I don't think that the teachers can really do too much about it anyway. But on the other hand too, they probably think about if it had anything to do with terrorism, and that something that needs to take action. It is just knowing about that. Anybody probably think about is like knowing about we all make mistakes, but on the other hand too, that knowing about with that so far as that lesson learned is knowing about that if you can maybe think of some things for actions that you would need to take, of course, in order to prevent some incident from happening. It was. And I can still remember that airplane that landed, of course, in the Hudson River. It was back, I think it was back in 2009. It was. But anyway. But other than that, it's talking about right here is for Tears of the Heart. Is like in 9/11 for Tears of the Heart, and go ahead I can tell anybody hearing me sign off by saying that got right there is the heart, and then color in the detail. And of course, right here is the field. From where the other hijacked aircraft. It's like I say, number 4 was that would have landed. Anyway, anybody will probably maybe think about that. Hey, it's like talking about that. If anybody were to wonder, I'm like that a couple times that I would be telling somebody what I heard on the news, basically talking about September 11th it was, and I'd probably tell anybody that I would laugh at times sometimes, but it was a kind of time where I would explain to the teachers about why are you laughing whenever we're talking about something serious. And a lot of times my answer a lot of that would be about that I'm trying not to get too depressed here. Like we're talking about something on the news, and in a lot of ways the way they looked at me sometimes, I kept thinking about the way that the teachers were looking at me. It was like, well, the way they looked at me was almost like that, I don't know what you're talking about. I don't know what you're talking about. Well, that's not what I heard on the news. And a lot of times it was just the way that they looked at me. A lot of times that I just start laughing about something, but then whenever I realize later, I'm like, yeah, it's not so funny, after all. But I can remember that whenever I was in school, a lot of times that I would, get into a mood to where I try not to get too depressed about talking about something such as, whenever the plane went into the building, about whoever that was trapped on the upper floor, the 95th floor or something like that, and that knowing about, for how much time they had to escape it was. But knowing about with me, though, that I'm just saying that that what I had to say about it is knowing about, still remember it. I'm sure anybody probably thinking about that it's a day that I'm sure that, none of us would ever forget it is. And, to keep our kids safe is knowing about that, yep, if you see something that's going on, and you might as well say something. And knowing about, anytime anybody probably thinking about a type of superhero that more likely would be real, more likely come from like what you call is like, so far is like the tears, you say, of the heart, of knowing about the type of superhero is knowing about that you go to school to make a grade, then for them say, to tell them your story about what you think. But other than that, it's like the 9/11 Tears of the Heart coloring activity.